Hey there, internet friends. Welcome to another episode of That Nerdy Site Show, a weekly podcast where the team members from That Nerdy Site get together to talk about our lives and all of the nerdy things we love about them. I'm your host, Trevor Starkey, and joining me this week we have Logan Wilkinson back on the show. How you doing, Logan?
I'm doing fantastic.
Excellent.
How are you, Trev?
I'm doing good. So last week we took off because Cam and I were basically just binging through Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, but didn't play enough of it to give kind of like an early impressions on it yet. I have since finished it. I finished it like last night as we're playing it. Cam still got plenty of time to go. I took a couple days off work last week, so I had extra time to really dig in. But instead, Logan wanted to come on because he's been watching a lot of movies this year. So we're going to be talking about Dune Part 2, which we'll do kind of our typical spoiler-free section first, and then we'll dive into full spoilers. And then Logan also has caught and will catch us up on Argylle and Drive-Away Dolls for some other 2024 films. So yeah, that's what you have to look forward to. Check out timestamps in the description for all of those if you just want to jump to something in particular. If you like what you hear, please remember to like, subscribe, rate, review, share the podcast with your friends, all that fun stuff. So Logan,
I will say, I really appreciate for all the Argylle fans out there that are here just for those thoughts. Yeah, check the timestamps.
So starting off with our Dune Part 2 spoiler-free thoughts. Before we even get into kind of like what we thought of the movie, I want to just kind of catch up on your relationship to Dune. Have you read the books? Did you watch like the version from the 80s? Where are you at on Dune?
My relationship with Dune is I've seen Dune Part 1, right?
That's mine as well.
I haven't read the novels. They had a sci-fi show in the early 2000s. I didn't watch either. I haven't seen Dune 84. Though Dune 84, I don't hate David Lynch doing something like this. But I haven't seen any of it, right? I mean, really my relationship with Dune is the influence it had on other things in this vein, right? Probably first and foremost Star Wars kind of onwards, but
sure.
Beyond that, it's just Dune Part 1.
Yeah, that's pretty much where I'm at. I remember I really loved Dune Part 1 when it came out. And I don't think I saw it in theaters. I think I only watched it on HBO Max because they did that whole like, hey, we're going to release it on the streaming day and date. And I was like, cool, I already paid for that. I'll watch that. And then I watched it like 2 or 3 times because I really enjoyed it. Thought it was just some great stuff. Denis Villeneuve continues to be one of my favorite directors in the space these days. And I think this is just like a great kind of collection that he's like. When that came out, I was like, please let them do a part 2 because it wasn't a given. And then fortunately, like a few days afterwards, they were like, and we've greenlit Dune Part 2. And I was like, yes, cool. I get to see where the rest of this story goes. I watched a lot of probably like explainer videos that have given me a broader sense of like, here's where the rest of Dune Part 1, or here's the rest of the Dune book is going to go. And then here's a little bit about the Dune Messiah book and Children of Dune. So I know like some like loose threads of where the stories can go from here. But yeah, I've not read any of them myself. I did also build the Lego Ornithopter. That's another Dune thing I've done. Even like on the gaming side of things, I know Dune has had some pretty notable games, especially in like the strategy game space, but I've never hopped in and played any of them because I didn't have any particular connection to the series. And I've seen probably lots of clips of the David Lynch stuff.
Same.
But I've not watched the whole thing in the context of it.
I think is the Paul Atreides. Is it Kyle MacLachlan? I think is Kyle.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you got like Sting as the
Austin Butler character.
Austin Butler character. Yeah.
It's interesting. Dune is an interesting one for me because just kind of taking it to like a broader level of like, as someone whose favorite film series or co-favorite film series, right, along with James Bond is Star Wars, the irony is that I've said pretty much my entire life I'm not a big sci-fi fan, right? And it sort of works in Star Wars because Star Wars, in a lot of ways, isn't a sci-fi series, right? It's a Western, it's a samurai movie, it's an action-adventure serial, right? It's all these things that aren't really sci-fi.
Yeah.
It's 100 things just that aren't sci-fi that just happen to be set in space, right? And Dune is very sci-fi. And I think it's interesting to kind of look at it through that lens because Shravi, on the other hand, is a huge sci-fi fan. She loves sci-fi movies and novels, and like Arrival and Annihilation are two of her favorite movies of all time, right? And I can watch those movies and appreciate them for what they're doing, but it's all maybe a tad too esoteric for me at times. And I think Dune Part 1...
Where do you fall in the Fifth Element?
Oh, Fifth Element is phenomenal.
Okay.
Let's be... I mean, but even the Fifth Element, right? Like, it's very much a sci-fi movie, but it's also like an action... It's a 90s action comedy too, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, even that is doing something different, right? And
I think there is an element to sci-fi where, I mean, like, especially if you get into like space sci-fi in particular, where it's like, well, space is the setting, but like, is that that alone making this sci-fi? Because it in the same way that like, superhero movies these days can be like, Winter Soldier is a superhero movie, but it's also a political thriller.
It's a 70s espionage thriller, right? Yeah.
So I think that there's like that genre blending that we can see here. With Star Wars in particular, I think about it as sci-fi because it's in space. But there are, as you kind of touched on, so many other influences that it's wearing on its sleeve that it's like, is this solely a sci-fi film?
And we'll get into I'm sure the Star Wars connection at some point with Dune because people talk about it a lot. But like, I think one of the things that makes Lucas stand out as a filmmaker, right? For, I think, as much love and hate as he gets for his strengths and weaknesses as kind of a director, I think his ability to blend so many different genres together and so many different inspirations and influences into something that is so singularly his is a really unique and really difficult thing to pull off, right? I mean, he's pulling from like Akira Kurosawa, like samurai movies and like John Ford Westerns and Flash Gordon 1930s serials and a little bit of Dune, right? And sort of throwing them all in a blender and it becomes something that is like not any of those things, right? That is so kind of on its own. And Dune Part 1, I think, is a really interesting sci-fi movie too, because I think it threads a fine line between really broad, esoteric, weighty, philosophical themes and questions and action, but even the action is really delayed and it kind of almost works in a Tarantino-esque fashion where like you'll go like an hour and then just explosion of violence and then it'll kind of simmer down again and kind of explode again. And obviously, as we saw in like Dune 84, it can fail really easily. And I think it is largely a testament to Denis Villeneuve and Timothée Chalamet of like how great Dune Part 1 is. And then Dune Part 2 just sort of, I think we probably both agree, takes it just kind of to the next level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then the other question kind of as we get into like our just general thoughts on Dune Part 2 is how did you see this movie? Because I went and saw it. I didn't see it opening weekend, but I saw it a few days after. I didn't see it opening weekend because I wanted to go see it. We have a 70 millimeter IMAX. I wanted to go see it there, and it was basically like filled up during the opening weekend. So I ended up seeing it like 11 a.m. on Tuesday because I was taking those days off for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. And even then, I was like sitting more off to the side than I typically would in a movie, but just because it was so full and packed. But like it was definitely like a cool experience to see and one that I knew I was going to want to see on a big screen after kind of how the first one was shot and hearing the good things about this one. I was like, okay, I want the big blockbuster theatrical experience for this one.
Yeah, I saw it at the tail end of opening weekend. We saw it in IMAX as well. And I really think that, I mean, the movie was made for that purpose, right? And almost like a Chris Nolan way of like, these movies are made for IMAX. This Dune Part 2 in particular is like made for IMAX. And I'm really happy that that's what I saw it in and I splurged for. although IMAX is barely more expensive these days.
True.
But yeah, I mean, I saw an IMAX and it's incredible in that way.
Cool. And then let's dive into kind of spoiler-free thoughts on the film as a whole. I'll start with I think Dune Part 1 does a lot of the heavy lifting for this one. So this one doesn't have to. I mean, it's definitely if you only watch this one, you'd probably be very lost on what's going on. They have like Florence Pugh's kind of character at the beginning of the movie is very much giving
sort of has
you
a narration,
like,
right?
Here's to catch up. Anybody that didn't watch the last movie, here's very
or
like
just has
Cliff
forgotten,
Notes.
right? Yeah.
But like the fact that the first movie did so much of the heavy lifting, even in setting up like a lot of the space rules of this universe, meant that this one could just kind of be like focus on the characters and the action and the setting and all of these beautiful how all of those things tied together in such a great way that I think it's better than the first one because it's not weighed down by a lot of that other kind of more plotting stuff. I will say, like, there were definitely times I was like, I'm watching this movie and I feel how slow some of these moments are, but not necessarily in a bad way. They might feel extra slow if I go back and rewatch it, but like on this first viewing, I'm feeling how slow this is, but it feels more like I'm living in this deliberately and there are reasons that we're spending this much time on this beat or this visual image or something like that. And so like, even though it has those moments, it like they feel earned. I wasn't, it's not one of those where I was like, oh my God, let it end already. Because it is a long movie and stuff like that. I was glad that I didn't have to do with 20 minutes of previews and stuff beforehand because it was very much like, we're going to start the movie at 11, no trailers or anything before. So I was like, oh, sweet. So it could have been like a 3-hour experience, but it was a 2-hour and 40-minute experience for me. Yeah. So that was nice. But like visually, there are a ton of like images of this movie that will stick with me. Ton of moments that will stick with me in a really cool way. And it is fun. Like I've seen the comparison. Obviously we were talking about kind of the links and the comparisons to Star Wars. Like it's really cool getting to watch these movies in a way that feels like how people watching the first Star Wars movies were coming out, like the original trilogy and stuff like that, of like, oh, look at the cool things this visual medium is capable of and the cool imagery we can play with and do. And I think Denis Villeneuve is just has like a great attention to detail and a great like focus on those elements. And then beyond that, like just wall to wall great performances. Everybody who pops up in this I feel is great and is in very much that Bond show mantra. Like everybody knows what kind of movie they're in when they're showing up here. I think there are a few particular standouts. I liked sure Austin Butler as Elvis. I think especially because of like the meme that he became coming out of Elvis and like the fact that he never left Elvis in like any promotional stuff and it like changed his voice and stuff. The performance he brings to Fade Ralpha on this is like an incredible performance and steals the show for the parts he's in. And he is one of those like we said, like the 1984 version had Sting in this role, and so like there is like a lineage, a history of like, oh, that's a notable character in this franchise, even if I didn't know what his deal was going into it. But to see like how he plays with that character, how he plays off of the other characters that he interacts with over the course of the film. Just a lot of great stuff there. And very much. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I mean, I really love Austin Butler's performance, right? And I just kind of wanted to add, like, he's it's one of those performances where, I mean, the movie's 2 hours and 40 minutes long, like you said, and Austin Butler's probably in all total like 10 to 15 minutes of this movie. But he is and doesn't come in at all until like an hour in at least. But he's such a electric personality once he comes on screen. You can't like, you know, it's a cliche, but you can't take your eyes off of him, right? He's so kind of unsettling and revolting, but like mesmerizing. And I've heard some people talk about how he's just sort of this raw force and like kind of all brute and no brains. I don't agree with that interpretation at all. I think he's very much calculating and knows exactly what he's doing, and you know, is playing sort of 3D chess with a lot of stuff happening with like the Harkonnens. And he's doing a lot of it just with his like eyes and facial expression, his body moving. He kind of hides behind someone or kind of steps closer. Like Austin Butler's performance in this movie in particular, I think is really a standout performance and would probably be on a very short list of my favorite performances in the entire movie. It's really great, and especially coming from something that is so not this in Elvis, right? Like it is such a departure.
Yeah. I also I think she didn't have a lot to do in the first movie, but I think Zendaya as Chani gets so much more to do in this film and is such a great counterpoint. We'll talk a little bit more when we dive into like spoiler stuff, but like her relationship with Paul is so fascinating. Sounds like it's a deviation a little bit from the books in terms of where she kind of falls on the like, is Paul Atreides the Messiah kind of alignment chart. But yeah, Timothée Chalamet's I think plays the struggles of Paul really well. Very much kind of building off of where we left off at the end of the last film, and like that vengeance that's driving him, while also fear of what he could become, is kind of pushing him a different direction. I really enjoyed. And shout out to Javier Bardem as Stilgar,
always,
who like
always.
His like the character's like religious fanaticism is like, it is some of the like bits of levity that we get over the course of the film. But like it works as levity because of how like genuinely he's portraying that character, and how like believable and like relatable he is, I guess. So yeah, those are some standout performances for me. Any others you want to throw into the mix?
Yeah, I mean, Javier Bardem, I think, is really great. And this is the least surprising thing about the movie, probably. Javier Bardem's had like a 20-year career of just being excellent at everything he does, whether it's No Country for Old Men or obviously Silva and Skyfall, where he's maybe the best Bond villain of all time.
Shout out to On Stranger Tides. If you want to go watch our Pirates of the Caribbean, that Plus series, please don't.
The best non-Barbosa, villain in the series easily. I think.
I guess he wasn't on Stranger Tides. That was Blackbeard. It was the last one.
He's in 5.
Dead
which is a good movie. Yeah, especially comparatively in that series. Javier Bardem I really enjoy a lot, especially because I think he portrays someone who is so devoted to his religion in, I think, a really nuanced way, actually, right? Like, I think it's really easy to overact and kind of paint people who are devoted to religion in these really kind of overbroad ways that almost becomes like soap opera-esque. But I think what I like about him is that he himself still has doubts as to whether or not Paul is the Messiah throughout a lot of this movie, right? He'll be like, he is, and then he's like, oh, but that wasn't very... And then it's like his own kind of wave back and forth of not being sure, right? Like, you would sort of expect someone who believes so fervently, but also isn't sure if this is the real deal or not, right? Because the image in their head maybe didn't look like this or act like this or do stuff like that, right? And so I really enjoy his portrayal because I think it is really nuanced, actually. And his exchange with Rebecca Ferguson's Lady Jessica character early in the movie of like, you're going to do this or we have no use for you, right? And we'll take you back in the desert, I think is also really great. Of like, there's also an element of like calculation in his part too, right? And I thought he was just incredible. Zendaya is arguably the best part of the entire movie, especially because, I think Timothée Chalamet is incredible in this movie. I can't like underline that enough. Like he is given so much to do and does all of it really, really well. But I think I like Zendaya just a tiny bit more because she's tasked to do a lot emotionally and doesn't actually have that many lines with which to do it. A lot of Zendaya's acting and performance and character arc is done just through her face, right, or her eyes. And I like, for example, the entire ending of the movie, right? There's like not a word said, but she's doing so much in that entire sequence that I just think she really stands kind of toe to toe with all of the great performance in this film, and I think kind of rises to the top with what she's doing because of the importance of her role among everyone else, both on Arrakis and just within Paul's circle and within Paul himself, right? Like, I think her and Paul's scenes in particular are simultaneously really beautiful and loving and very kind of naively sweet and also really tragic.
Yeah.
And I think she conveys, and Timothée Chalamet convey all of that wondrously well, right? Because in some ways, and they sort of talk about that, like she understands and knows Paul best, and also sort of among everyone around him actually cares about Paul the person in a way that no one else does, right? Everyone else is sort of viewing him as something else, whether it's, Stilgar viewing him as the Messiah, and that's how he's viewing everything. The Harkonnens just view him as something to kill. The Emperor views him as a threat. And Lady Jessica views him as almost as a pawn, right? His political power. But sort of uniquely, that's a character who just cares about Paul the person, Paul the man. And so I like it for that dynamic and that element as well. And yeah, I think she does great.
Yeah. Last thing I want to kind of go on before we dive into full spoilers is just how beautifully shot this film is.
Yeah.
Again, touching on some like incredible imagery and moments that I will think about and have continued to pop into my head since this came out. When I think back on this movie, I'll think of like, oh my God, that was a really cool thing that they did, and that was a really cool thing that they did. Yeah, I think I've heard this conversation a little bit. We're recording this as the Oscars are going on. And obviously this movie was originally slated to come out a few months ago, would have been a front runner, I think, in pretty much any of the special effects categories as well. I mean, a lot of the technical categories, I think it would have run away with, especially in a lighter year like last year's. But yeah, the so many of the action sequences I think are also incredibly well done, and they're done I think in juxtaposition with what I kind of talked on earlier of like there are deliberate moments in this. Those work well in contrast with when the action does ramp up and we do get to see like things like moving at a pace. It heightens those, I think, a little bit more in incredibly cool and fun storytelling ways.
I think the movie is, easily one of the most beautiful films put to screen, right? I mean, it's just gorgeous to look at, right? And I think, we've seen a lot of desert planets. This is one of the inspirations Star Wars took. And I don't think Tatooine is necessarily ugly, but certainly there's no sequence that looks as good as kind of the roll and spice kind of rolling across Arrakis' surface, and like the way that they use kind of gold, I think, kind of this golden palette of the planet really well, and the oranges mixing together. And there are a couple of shots that I think are just some of the most beautiful things I've seen. And there's no action, right? It's Timothée Chalamet and Zendaya sitting on top of a sand dune, just looking out, and I'm riveted and just kind of gobsmacked by it, right? Like, oddly enough, a lot of my favorite visual shots aren't ones that are super futuristic and sci-fi and space. It's just what they're doing with this landscape, right? And that's before you get to like the Austin Butler introduction sequence, right? Where it just goes monochromatic, right? And it's black and white, and it's so well done. It's something that I think, you talked earlier about how Denis Villeneuve has a real, I think, eye for shot composition and framing and finding beauty in sort of every frame of the film. And I think there are a couple of those moments where it's just sort of like, this is just gratuitously beautiful and I love it, right? They're really great shots, even down to like the way that the Austin Butler and Timothée Chalamet duel at the end of the movie is like framed and shot, right? I think it's just like really gorgeous. I mean, it is Dune Part 1 set a lot of this up, and then Dune Part 2 gets to use kind of the tools in the sandbox even more to really show off this world and this planet and everything involved with it. Because from so much of this movie, we are ostensibly just in a desert, right? And that could be not interesting to look at. And I think the ways they frame it to make it just something that you can't take your eyes off of is really a testament to the cinematography of the film, because it is really something else.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's dive into full spoilers then. Last chance to dip away. If you do want some of our Argylle thoughts, check out the timestamp below for when you can jump ahead to that.
Please do.
So one of the things I want to touch on, kind of going off of what you one of the things you highlighted there, I loved the monochromatic Harkonnen world and like just the visual storytelling. And it very much was when that comes in the movie and we get the like from behind shot of Feyd-Rautha kind of like walking toward, and it is like in black and white. I had this moment of like, are they going to surprise me? And it's like, oh, the first half of this movie was the Paul Atreides story, and now we're going to get to see like a chunk of the movie that is Feyd-Rautha, and it's going to like lead to kind of them, butting heads. It doesn't go full into that, and we cut back away to Paul a lot quicker. But I love just the establishment of that, the setting of like, oh, the reason this world is monochromatic is because they live under a black sun. That's why all of the characters look the way we've seen them on Arrakis and stuff like that. I like, one of the coolest things I will think about of this movie is this is, a story in our future. So like fireworks were a thing, but fireworks don't like exist on this planet or don't work on this planet. So the fireworks are like these ink blots that like explode and splash in the space. And I was just like, that is so like, I don't know why that visual and that like idea is just scratching that part of my brain in such a good way, but it does, and it was really cool. I think it's just like the full picture of like that existing in a world. Like they do such a great job with such limited like scope and storytelling, really, of like, here's why all of this is the way it is, and it's a shot of a black sun and like everything else being monochromatic kind of thing. And then you go into like the buildings and we see there is like light color and stuff like that. It was just such a cool like brevity of storytelling, but like just immediately tells me more about this world and about so many of the characters we've already known than I could have imagined a couple shots would have done.
Right.
So yeah, shout out to that. Absolutely.
No, I think that whole sequence that introduces him is some of the most electric scenes, partially because, to your point, we don't know what's happening, right? It is such a jarring cut almost, and like shift, and it's easily the most unnerving and unsettling sequence, right? Everyone is just sort of a creep here and just sort of pure evil, for lack of a better word. I love the sort of almost, Game of Thrones-esque, backbiting and kind of back and forth between the Harkonnen family members just in general, right? We basically get this right after Dave Bautista, like,
just utterly fails at taking out
Yeah.
the and like runs away in cowardice. And it's like,
Yes.
all right, we got to take him out of power and we're going to put this new person in power. And then we
Yeah.
cut to this new person that they're going to put in power. And it's like, okay, what's his deal? What are we going to learn about him?
Whose uncle drugs 2 of the 3 guards, but doesn't drug one of them, right? To see if he can really do it or not, right? And if he doesn't, that's one rival for power taken out. If he does, great, here's a new heir, right? Like, it's such a cool Machiavellian sort of messed up family, but that's exactly what the Harkonnens would be, right? Because they are just such awful people. And so...
And they come from this harsh world that, like, again, we see through very brief visual storytelling. Yeah,
and so I think it's just incredible. And I think it is one of the most unnerving and unsettling sequences. You have Lea Seydoux pop in for like a 5-minute cameo here, but she's great in it. And...
It's weird that like she pops up and I'm like, oh, Kojima's gonna love this movie.
Yeah, and it's weird. The weirder thing for me is that like she's in 5 minutes of this movie and leaves me wanting so much more and leaves me with such an impression versus 2.5 hours in Spectre where she's just given nothing to do. No, she's great, no time to die, but Spectre she's not. And it's like, man, that's the difference with having good writing and something to do with your character. Because she's great. I love that whole sequence and like the weird sexual tension that sort of envelops there, right? Like I think it's about as good of an introduction to a character you can make, especially so deep into a movie. Just kind of cut and then be like, here's our main antagonist and we're off to the races, right? And then everything from then on, right? Like to see sort of how intense he's, right? Like he flamethrowers a person to death, right? And like one thing we didn't talk about,
like he's testing out like the blades, and he's like he slits the throat of one of his concubines or whatever, and then he stabs another one. He's like, the point needs to be sharper.
One of the things we didn't talk about in the pre-spoiler sequence that I think is really important to talk about too is the movie's visually stunning, but I think just as important and as well done is the sound in this movie is incredible, right? And the usage of sound in that whole gladiatorial arena, right? The kind of banging of the drums and booming of the music that kind of builds to that, right? Like the cut of him having the flamethrower, turning it on, and us not seeing her burn, but because it then cuts like the sandstorm wrestling outside, right? Like it uses sound in such a ingenious and creative manner. It'll just cut to absolute silence at times, really like punctuate a point, right? Like, and I think a lot of the stuff it does around the Harkonnens in particular utilizes these themes of like light and darkness really, really well. And yeah, I think that whole sequence is one of the standouts of the movie.
Yeah. I also want to shout out the like one of the first little action things we get of the like Paul, Lady Jessica, and the Fremen kind of like hiding from the Harkonnen men.
Oh yeah.
And like we're kind of in the same boat as Paul. Like we don't understand what's going on. We just see like Fremen, fleeing off one way and then others fleeing off another way. And like Paul and Jessica are like, what do we do? Like we see the Harkonnens kind of coming up, and then like we get the Thumpers kind of doing their thing to try and draw the sandworms. So the Harkonnen, like they go flying up in just a very cool visual, like they have cool little space jetpacks that don't have like thrusters in the way we're used to seeing them. They just are floating up to the top of this, and then just immediately getting picked off and just like
I was gonna say, the thuds back down, like that sound in particular is like, again, that's what I'm talking about. The movie does sound so well.
Yeah, and it's because it's those thuds like in concert with the Thumpers that are like trying to draw the actually I guess those have stopped because somebody like picks them off, somebody snipes one of them off, but then immediately like those thumps get replaced by the bodies dropping and falling, and just every time the Fremen show what a threat they are, like fighting in their home turf, like the great visual of like we see just the breather basically like sticking out of the air, and we hear like the little gun going to the sound design, like we hear the air coming through the filter kind of thing, and then as somebody approaches, they like come out and just start like slashing and swiping, and
that whole sequence of taking on like the spice thing,
Yeah.
that first one is incredible. It's an incredible sequence of just like the immensity of the mining operation, like the sound of everything, like ship in the air, they're shooting down, right? Like it is, I think, one of the best action set pieces of the whole thing. It's incredible.
and playing with the rules that have been established with like how these shields work and stuff is, oh, the thing is shielded, so your rocket launcher isn't going to do anything until they're firing. That's when the shield drops, so we need to draw his fire. Like the wonderful strategy there. The great comic moment of like the Harkonnen running up to Chani, and she shoots him with a rocket launcher and says reload. Love that bit. I love the bit of, okay, Paul's gonna draw the fire, he's gonna run from one leg to the other, and then the other leg starts lifting. He's like, oh shit. Like just such a great bit there. But yeah, the action there, I think my favorite moment of the action is we hear the rocket go off and we see the perspective of the gunner looking, and like the rocket has already fired, and then we like see it going into like, and through the shield,
like stuck in the shield, and slowly coming through.
Like
right?
we the audience know what has happened in the immediate before of that moment, and it's just such a great, like it's not, oh, we're from a bird's eye view, we see Chani shoot the rocket, and then like I love the perspective of seeing that from the gunner's perspective of like, dang, I didn't get the guy. We go back to where I know this other thing. Oh crap! Boom. I absolutely like that. That is another one of those sequences that I'm going to think about and remember because of just how creative it is, and I love what it sets up with Paul's character immediately after of like. Like his line of like, you've been fighting the Harkonnen for decades, my family's been fighting them for centuries, and like I know how they think. I like, so it positions him
being welcomed into the family too, right?
A tactical military strategist for these people, and like the way that turns into the Muad'Dib, and the legend grows, and the fear, and he like his guerrilla warfare campaign around that is so fascinating, that like he's doing that in and of itself, knowing full well that he could exploit other things in the prophecies that that people are expecting of him. And I love that, like I love those moments with Stilgar where he's like, I don't think I'm the whatever cheesy Kazarak or whatever it is, whatever his titles are. I don't think I'm that. And then Stilgar's like, he's so humble, of course he's that. Those great beautiful beats. But yeah, like him taking what he learned from Gunny, from Jason Momoa's character, from his father,
dad, right?
Like him being able to take those tactics and kind of exploit them, and know what the Harkonnens are going to do, know how to use the Fremen sand power that his dad was after. Great stuff there. Speaking of sand power, the worm rider moment, like calling
incredible.
the sandworm is such a like.
It's like the money shot of the movie, right? Yeah.
So good, so striking, and so like.
So tense too, because you're not like hearing them be like, "Oh, that's bigger than we thought," right? That's like a granddaddy one, right? And then like that whole
that big,
just like him just like falling for what feels like forever before he finally like hooks onto it, right? And like slowly gets his way up there, and it's just such an incredible, like introduction to that whole thing of riding on like the worms, and like. Yeah, and
it is such a like.
I love how chaotic it is.
It is, it's such an incredible, like, so much of the action in this is like incredible in spite of itself. It's
yes.
Fascinating how thrilling and tense that is when like really it is just a character falling through a lot of dust, and we're just seeing sand fly into the camera's face for a lot of it and stuff like that. And we see like a hook kind of grab onto something and like pull a flap open. It's like, oh, he hooked onto part of the thing's skin or whatever. And it's just that, like, especially because we've seen a couple times like riders kind of in the distance or something like that, but we've never seen like what that process of actually getting onto it looks like getting to see that here, and especially for a first time out, how chaotic and whatnot is. It makes it a little bit, I'd say almost silly in terms of like, okay, well, when they start like doing caravans of people later in the film, I'm gonna buy it. But in the back of my head, I'm like, so did somebody jump on and then like stop the worm so that they could like load on Lady Jessica's caravan and stuff like that? all these people that they're shepherding down. Like how do those things work? And then there's also the like, and how does somebody dismount? What does that process look like?
I had the same thought, because there's a point where like he like bursts through like a sand dune at the end, and my thinking was, oh, that's where you're gonna like summit the thing and it's gonna like come back down. He's gonna hop off right then when he's like on top of the sand dune, because it'll be like the smallest drop. But he just fucking like Kool-Aid man through, and I was like, oh, he's just gonna keep going, I guess. All right, cool. Yeah, so how they stop and how they get on for caravans is also a thought I had as well.
Yeah, but at the same time, like I don't need those moments. I'm fine just letting those be fun little mysteries, because sometimes if you do get like too in the weeds on this stuff, it is going to lose a little bit of its luster and magic. But like, that moment, that being like the big hero shot, that I would say that is like the equivalent of like, your Luke looking at the two suns kind of thing, of like him standing up on the worm as like, I'm ready to embrace who I'm becoming and something like that.
Speaking my language.
Yeah.
Two suns.
And then what else? Other sequences or anything else I want to, I guess. I mean, the fade route, the fight at the end. I think I guess like Paul's whole journey to that point, like when he reaches the turning point of like, all right, I guess I have to do this. I have to go drink the water of life. Like the resistance that he has of traveling south for so long because he's seen, what could happen, what might happen. But him finally kind of saying, okay, if I want to get what I need to get, I have to go that route. I have to get these clear visions and clear images. Let's go. Because it's after Rautha basically comes and like decimates the kind of their home base, I guess, there in the north. Is such a like. I love that push and pull that he has throughout the movie. And that's where I think his relationship with Shawnee for a lot of that is so fascinating, of her constant, like, falling for and loving Paul while still very much saying like, I think your prophecy is bullshit. I think your prophecy has been used to suppress my people for generations. And it is a tool of the oppressors. And like, what is going to prevent you from just becoming another oppressor of my people? Like, we need to save ourselves. And I love like that very much until kind of Paul hits that turning point of, okay, I need to become this other thing. Like he's Paul in full agreement. Yeah. Like, yes, absolutely. Like I want to fight alongside you, but your people should be the one saving this. It is a fascinating, I know there's a lot of conversation around this around like, oh, it's like a white savior story. It's like, no, it's not. Like it is an allegory about the problems of a white savior narrative.
Obviously, we're in the spoiler section. So like, obviously Paul was designed to sort of lay out potential problems with like the hero's journey, right? And just like the kind of classical savior in particular, that they can be Luke Skywalker, but they can also be Paul Atreides and launch like a universe-wide genocide.
They can be Darth Vader, as we would later find out in the Star Wars side of things.
Right, and like they could be Luke or Anakin, right? And that's the problem with saviors, potentially, is you don't know which one you're going to get. And so obviously that's a much talked about element of Dune, and an element that like is probably the thing that stuck the most out with me and like affected me the longest after I left the theaters, was just like Paul's arc and sort of, are you going to give up power and the ability to make a difference, right? Affect change in a larger sense, right? Or your happiness, essentially, right? And that's the trade-off that for so long he refuses to, he just wants to live his life, right? And be happy and be with this woman that he loves, until he doesn't. One of my critiques of the movie is that moment to me feels so rushed, precisely because for the entire film, he's resisting this so much. His mom and everyone else starts going down south. He's still rejecting. He's like, I'm going to stay here and be here. And it's basically just like a scene of like him walking, having a vision, and then him being like, I'm going to go now. And then him immediately doing the water of life kind of thing. And like, it feels weird to say in a movie that's 2 hours and 40 minutes long, but I almost wanted like an extra like 10 minutes of like more of Paul wrestling with this, right? Because it feels so abrupt of him being like, no. Okay, I'm 100% in. And it's not like a slow kind of breakdown. It is just like a jarring shift for me, which is so disappointing because I do love so much of Paul's kind of tragic arc in this movie. And it's a weird tragedy too, obviously, because of the fact that he ostensibly wins, right? And frees, the people of the planet and defeats the Harkonnens, defeats the rivals, gets, justice, but at a tremendous personal cost, let alone to everyone in the universe, but like just to him personally, a huge cost. And so I wanted that almost to be a little bit more earned than I think it is. And it feels weird to say in a movie that's so long, but that element in particular for me felt so rushed, and probably is the thing I think quabble with the most in how the movie did that plot point, because it is so important.
Yeah, I agree. I think it is such a, like, we don't see him like slowly warming up to the idea of becoming that character, and it is like,
he's
okay,
like so he has vehemently against it.
He suffers like some defeat when Fade Rautha comes in and basically like starts wiping out the people of the North, and we see that so abbreviated basically through a montage effectively, that like when he's like, all right, we have to do it. Like, I guess, because it is, he sees the vision of the nukes burning Chani's face, I guess is the thing. And he, so in a sense, he is doing it to prevent that future and to try and do it for her. I think there is also this element of the waters of life probably change him more than he was even anticipating into like, okay, like it's the like Doctor Strange thing of like, now there is only one way where this works out,
right?
And I need
like
I can see all these other futures.
Right,
I've seen this future where my future sister Anya Taylor-Joy pops up, and that's a fun little cool cameo. And I'm very curious.
We're in the end game now. It's very much that,
where we see her if we get a future movie. But yeah, it's like and we see waters on Dune, on Arrakis kind of thing. So him also going full tilt and like showing up and knowing the rules of this summit. You have to be a leader. Like, so if you want to speak here, you have to kill Stilgar. Why would I kill my sharpest sword before the battle? Like, why would I do that? Like, no, you need to listen to me. And like the way he fully exploits the fanaticism of that area, and he talks to, like, he isolates somebody. He's like, I know because I survived the waters of life like no man has ever done before. I'm going to tell your story and I'm going to win people over. And obviously, like, the stoking of that flame that Lady Jessica has been doing all throughout the movie is also like weird and horrifying, and exploitative. And so I love that like Chani is the one that like storms out of that of like this like this is wrong. Gunny like grabs her, is like, you like it's pointless for you to do what you're trying to do. You don't have to enjoy it, but like it's pointless for you to fight it.
That's a good point I haven't even thought about. That whole fluctuation, because I'd been so focused on like him making the decision to go down south and drink the waters, and like that being so rushed. But even like to your point, once he does and wakes up, he's fucking going off at like a 20. He is like such a different character and like so intense all of a sudden. It's like even that is on like a slow build. It is like Paul like decides on a flip of a switch, and then like on a flip of a switch is like a whole other person. There's like not really a lot of like build up on like either side of that decision. Yeah, that element feels like the weakest part of the movie, but it is interesting to see Timothée Chalamet do something so intense, I think, and so kind of extreme in a lot of ways.
Especially after like, the last thing I saw him in was Wonka.
Him same, right?
Becoming the zealot kind of, not, I guess not zealot, but like him becoming the like Muad'Dib that everybody fears and the Fremen will follow.
And Lady Jessica's role, I think, is really interesting, right? Because in some ways, there's not I think there's a pretty compelling case to make that Lady Jessica is like one of the main villains of the movie, right? I mean, she's very Lady Macbeth. You know, we were talking about Shakespeare before we started recording. Like, she's very Lady Macbeth in that regard, and unrepentantly so. In fact, kind of gleefully rubbing it in the face of those who stood against her at the end of the movie, right when Paul is victorious. And so the way that she manipulates everyone around her, right? Like, and that's why I said at the beginning of the movie, right, that like there is no one else other than the one woman that Paul loves and is loved by that treats him as a person, because even his own mother from Dune Part 1, right, has been treating him as a thing to kind of further her own interest. And
I wasn't supposed to have a son, but I had you because I think you could be the Lisan al-Gaib or whatever.
And my house can stand for like 1,000 generations now, right? That kind of thing. And it's like that you get seeds of that in Dune Part 1, and then Dune Part 2, it like explodes to the forefront where she's unrepentantly like, this is all she cares about is Paul becoming this thing, right? And she sort of ruthlessly manipulates everyone around her. There's a whole monologue she's talking to her unborn child where basically she's like, we have to pick off the weak first, right? Like, start there and build right this like religion, and like lays
I need
out
to
her
convert everybody that doesn't believe him.
And so she's very clear about what she wants and explicit, and her arc is she's a great character that you just hate by the end of this movie, right? Or certainly I did, right? And I think the way that Rebecca Ferguson falls into, I think, her worst self, while still trying to pretend that she's doing it for the benefit of others, right? And Paula kind of calls her out on that to her face right before she leaves to go south, and kind of a great, like, kind of explosive scene between the two. But yeah, she's the real winner of this movie, right? More than any other single character, because Paul is obviously so damaged by the end. His relationship with a lot of people is damaged by the end. The Freemen have sort of a pyrrhic victory, knowing kind of what's going to happen next. And the Harkonnens are obviously beaten. She's the only person who doesn't really have any losses, right? She got exactly what she wanted, and watching her do that in a sort of Lady Macbeth-esque manner, but without the comeuppance at the end, is startling to watch. Because that's the thing about Dune Part 2, right? Is that it is probably the most bummer of the good guys win ending you're likely to get, right? Because in the good guys winning, right, it is sort of a classic thing of like, in the good guys winning, they sort of became the very thing that they fought against, right? And like the Harkonnen, like we're Harkonnens twist, right? Which I don't know. I think was maybe meant to do more for me than it did. And I was like, I don't really. It just seems because they didn't really go. They were like, we're Harkonnens, and then don't really do anything with it again. There's no confrontation with the Harkonnens at the end. It's just kind of like, I don't really need that.
Yeah, it's an interesting. I thought it was like an interesting reveal, and I like that, like it is this like Deus Ex Machina of the Waters of Life that reveal that truth to both Lady Jessica and Paul. Like Paul especially being like it has opened my eyes to like both the lineage of my mother's side and father's side. Did you know that you were the daughter of Baron Harkonnen? And she's like, not until I drank the waters myself. But I love that also just ties into the broader like game and like the 40 chess that the Bene
strings that
Gesserit
being
are
pulled, right?
playing
Yeah.
in this universe. Obviously, like they already were hedging their bets with Lea Seydoux character
Yeah.
coming in and doing all that. They tested, but like didn't want Paul to be the was it the Kwisatz Haderach,
The Messiah, right? Yeah, basically, yeah.
The thing that they've been kind of planting the seed for. But like Jessica, like having the relationship with Leto Atreides to have Paul instead of the girl that she was supposed to have, like she's been doing that kind of plotting for years to maybe she'll be the mother of the Messiah kind of thing, is a very fascinating thing. And I did like that. It, I mean, Paul already had the like personal revenge motive, but I think that like that cements it as this is about revenge, not justice. Like he's like, and in particular him storming in and the incredible like end sequence stuff that we'll touch on a little bit more, I guess, in a bit. But like the kind of culmination of that going in, him going straight to the Baron, who's already been cut down and weakened because of the Emperor and stuff. But like him just doing the like hello grandfather kind of, and like stabbing him, and like we get that moment of the Baron Harkonnen like piecing together what he's saying, and like, oh, I didn't know that, but that's fascinating that in some form or fashion the Harkonnens live on. Haha. Like like he almost gets the last laugh in that moment,
right?
And in a very interesting thing. Also, speaking to that, I just want to shout out, going back to like the Austin Butler love. I love that he's just doing the Stellan Skarsgård voice. And that goes to like, he was Elvis for so long. So hearing that voice, hearing the Stellan Skarsgård voice come out of him, I was like, oh, I love that. Like he went full in on like making that choice, either because that is what, I mean, it's not what the Harkonnens sound like, because obviously we've also seen like Dave Bautista not talking with that affectation. So it's either a deliberate choice that Fade Rautha is making because he wants to emulate the Baron, or like that is the affectation to his voice that he's playing because he idolizes the Baron or something. Like I love that that's like a layer to his character that, you know, also just puts him far more in alignment with how ruthless and cruel that the Baron is. But go ahead.
I would just say I 100% agree, right? I mean, I think their relationship is one of the more interesting aspects of the film, right? And I think Austin Butler and Stellan Skarsgård have a really interesting dynamic, we'll say, right? But one that you sort of can't help but feel yourself pulled into and kind of just like lean closer in your seat. And yeah, like obviously like the kiss as like Austin Butler's character leaves, and then like he like grabs his face and kisses Stellan Skarsgård back. Like there's this really interesting dynamic and like tension and like struggle for power between the two, right? But yeah, Paul bursting in and killing the Baron. I mean, we're at the end now of the movie, so we can just kind of do it. But like that whole sequence, I think, is really extraordinary. Both like the army of like sandworms that come in, but then just like the pound and
blowing up a mountain.
Right, like the pound and like the Emperor soldiers run forward, and then it's just Paul and like a legion. It's very Anakin, Order 66, like all the stormtroopers march to the temple. To be clear, like it is very much evocative of that scene of like Paul leading his army up the thing, ignoring everyone, killing the Baron, and then turning to him. And his tension with the Emperor is really interesting too. And we've gone the whole thing without talking about Christopher Walken, and it's because he's kind of largely whatever in this movie. And so I think partially by design to kind of show how weak and ineffectual the Emperor largely is, actually, especially compared to these larger powers, right? Like he took down the Atreides because he was threatened by them, right? And that's the action sort of a weak man, right? Of a man who's scared, and who's kind of bullied into it by the Harkonnens. And so I like a lot of that, but it does kind of mean you get Christopher Walken kind of disappearing. But Florence Pugh's great, and I love whole sequence. We already talked about the Paul and Austin Butler like fight at the end, and the knife fight is really well executed and really tense, and it caught me off guard by like the stab wound to Paul and kind of being like, oh fuck, what gonna happen here? And then kind of how that resolves itself. But one of my favorite shots of the entire film is as like Paul walks up to the Emperor, says, I'm gonna take your daughter. The Emperor like bows down, kisses his hand, and everyone in the room bows down except for
Chani.
3 people,
Yeah,
right?
Chani
Paul,
and
Chani, and then Florence Pugh's character, and they all just stand in like this cross current of like obviously what Dune Messiah will be, right? Assuming Denis Villeneuve will make the kind of last part of this trilogy of films he wants to do, like it's an incredibly striking scene, and again like a really great shot of just sort of like what the landscape is of this now, and the 2 sides of Paul, right? And him right before that saying like, I want you to know that I will always love you. Like, you will always have my heart.
Yeah.
To Chani, which I think is 100% true.
Yeah.
But also sort of then immediately breaking her heart and breaking his own heart, I think, to a degree, right? And this kind of pursuit.
Yeah, this is the political machinations I need to follow.
Yeah.
I need this power. I need to marry the emperor, the lady Irlana or whatever Florence Pugh's character's name is. I need to marry her so that I have the political clout. And it's like it's referenced earlier in the film of like when Lady Jessica's like, you need to save yourself for a more political match, basically.
Yeah.
And it's like that's the most political match you could have there. So yeah, I love that bit, and yeah, absolutely the tension in that. And I think going back to the Christopher Walken-ness of it, I think Christopher Walken's like big scene of this movie, in addition to the stuff that he has with Florence Pugh kind of before going to Arrakis, but I think it is like him telling Paul, "This is why I killed your father."
Yeah,
because he was led by his heart, which does not work. And I think in that moment, Paul knows he's not telling a lie. Like he knows that his father probably wouldn't. His father was too good a man to survive in this cutthroat world, obviously. So I think there's a tinge of like, I want to kill you because of how right you are and because of how much I hate it. So I'm going to fight you, name your champion kind of thing. Yeah.
I also think that sequence is great too, because it's another great reminder of, what is the thing you're going to give up, right? You can be good, right? You can be great. You can have power, or you can have love and be happy, right? But you can't necessarily have all of them, is sort of a major theme of Doom, I think. And, Leto Atreides was content to not be the most powerful man in the world, and be happy, be a good man, right? Sort of above all else, and be a good father and have the love of his family. And Paul chooses a different route, right? Whether because he thinks he has to or not, he still goes a different way. And so I think it's interesting to, this is almost like the inverse of the typical like sins of the father, and this is almost like the good deeds of the father, don't continue to the son necessarily, right? Almost like an inverse of the Godfather. And so I find that really interesting too, right? Like Paul having an example of someone doing a different way, and choosing to go a different route, or being forced to, right? Again, probably by his mother, and circumstances around him. But that sequence, I think, is one of the saddest, most tragic victories you're likely ever to see, and how heartbreaking that whole scene is, and how powerfully striking. Again, that shot of like Paul, Florence Pugh, and Chani all together, and just silence. No one says a word, and then just lingers on them for like 30 seconds and cuts.
Yeah.
To like the Imperial March, basically playing like all the troopers getting on the ships. I think is an incredibly powerful ending.
Yeah, and the kind of ending there also of like the other houses that have shown up
Yeah.
for this kind of conflict, not recognizing Paul's claim and
Yeah.
Paul's like ascension to the throne was a fascinating thing, because I think one of the reasons that the Emperor saw Leto as a threat was because he was beloved by a lot of the other houses.
Yeah.
So I would have expected them to be allies against the Harkonnens. You know, this like the Emperor and the Harkonnens colluded to decimate House Atreides. One member of House Atreides survived. Like it's kind of the like, they did this to House Atreides. What would stop them doing it to any of the other houses? So you would think the other houses would be on Paul's side, but like, and maybe if he didn't make the power play to become Emperor, they would have
I think
joined in against the Emperor with him. But maybe
I think that's
it is
the
like
thing,
that.
right?
Oh, you've outreached. Like, it's probably all of them being like, why should you be the Emperor, young pup? Like, we are, you know, we're more established, all this lineage, and we don't obviously get their thinking of that. We don't get to see that. Maybe that's something that'll get explored in a future installment or something. But yeah, the ending being like, and so the Holy War begins, and that being the billions of lives that Paul was seeing. That was another like, oh, I wasn't expecting Gurney to come back with that as the response. Like, I was expecting the happy ending of like, all right, yes, the people are with you, Paul. May your reign be long and fruitful, and we'll see. You know, the like, are you going to free the Fremen, or are you, or have they just become subjugated to a new fighter? Fascinating stuff. Interesting.
I viewed, the last thing I'll say is I viewed it, an element of like, oh, okay, yeah, it's interesting now. And I think the reasoning would be the Emperor is a easy nothing figure, right? And it's that sort of delicate balancing all the houses, right? And they probably all do love House Atreides, right? It's the noble house, it's the good house kind of thing. But by having the Emperor, it's sort of like a nothing person. They can all kind of be a level playing field. And then by having that, it can also become a really powerful house that can sort of dominate everyone else and break up the uneasy peace, which is something that, again, Leto Atreides probably knew, which is also why he didn't want it, but also because he's just a good person. And so, yeah, I think, again, it's a really tragic thing. And we don't even get the option of, like, what would Paul do otherwise, because the Fremen just become the clone troops, right? They just become his army to wage holy war on, right? And so, again, they gain their freedom, but at what cost, right? And so I think, that'd be the last thing I would say on the ending, is just how it leaves no one a real winner except for Lady Jessica, and Paul gets his victory, but at a truly terrible cost, right?
Yeah, and I think kind of going off of some of the other Chani stuff in that, like, I love that she basically wanders back off into desert. She's not particularly interested in fighting in Paul's war. I'll be curious. I know just from like having heard other things in the books and stuff, like in the books, she and Paul have a kid, and is that kid gonna be basically a challenger to the throne or something like that? What does that relationship end up being? So I'll be curious but they did a much more abbreviated version of that, and they basically sped up the timeline for the sake of the movie. But I love that. I love also in the going back to kind of the sequence leading up to the final bit. I loved the shot of Chani like fighting through the forces. That was very much mirroring one of Paul's visions of himself doing the same thing in the first movie. Thought that was like a really cool, like, oh, like we saw a potential future, in the first movie, and now here's the actual sequence playing out. I thought that was a fascinating choice that I'm sure we'll have like a lot of think pieces and video essays about it that I'll be interested in hopping into. But yeah, overall, fantastic film. And I don't know if I'll go back and see it again in theaters. Maybe I will. But it's definitely I look forward to it coming to streaming and just throwing it on my big TV and just kind of enjoying it in there. I will say, you mentioned sound design earlier. This was fortunately, at least again from my screening, mixed better than most, where like I wasn't having a hard time distinguishing dialogue from the sound, but there were probably still a few things I missed. So I'll love being able to kind of sit down and watch it with the subtitles and catching everything that's going on in the
Every
film.
single thing that's being said.
But yeah, just enjoying that in the privacy of my own home will be a delight as well. So yeah, shout out to Dune Part 2.
I really liked it. I think it has flaws, right? But on the whole, I think it's just a really great visual and audio achievement.
All right. Well, let's move over then into Argylle, which you saw a few weeks back.
Yes.
It was one that I contemplated seeing. Like, I like a lot of the people behind it, but I just didn't hear enough good things about it. So I was like, I'll wait until it comes to streaming or something like that. I don't need to go sit in the theater and watch this one for a little while. So Argylle, tell me what your thoughts on Argylle were.
Yeah, I mean, to quote my Letterboxd review, that sure is a Matthew Vaughn flick, right? I mean, it's just, if you've seen Matthew Vaughn, it's a Matthew Vaughn flick, right? So Kingsman 1, 2, The Kingsman, Kick-Ass. I think that the way that I've described Argylle to people is I really like probably the first 2/3 of this movie. There are a lot of twists in the film, and they work to varying degrees. I think the end is really messy. But I think it's also like intentionally trying to be messy and a little over the top. I mean, I think part of the issue for me is that almost like Baby Driver, maybe is a good comparison. There is a sense of, okay, this is taking place in our world. And then at a certain point, they're just sort of like, we just kind of want it to just not, and we're just going to kind of play fast and loose with like our own rules of like what's happening and the laws of whatever. And so it's very over the top and absurd by the end when it's like its final action sequence. But a lot of it and the build up to that, I think, is really engaging. I think Bryce Dallas Howard is great in the movie.
Before diving into just kind of broad strokes, my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is Argylle, the character Argylle is Henry Cavill's character, and he's basically like a James Bond-esque character in a novel series, right?
Yeah, it's close enough, yeah.
And Bryce Dallas Howard is the writer of that series.
Yes, that's correct.
And people start kind of thinking, hey, this seems a little too close, too on the nose, so like she kind of gets brought into or swept up in the spy, like actual spies about her fictional spy kind of thing. And then I know there are enough, right? I've seen enough kind of other videos about it, and like so I know there are some twists and turns, you know.
Yeah, but that's close enough, right?
That's kind of the premise.
Out of the running. I mean, I think part of the issue is, you know, I really like Sam Rockwell in it, and in some ways, Sam Rockwell might be my favorite part of the movie. He's certainly up there. I mean, spoiler or mild spoiler, right? Like they kind of pursue a like romantic element between him and Bryce Dallas Howard that I think does not work. And it's sort of a shame because throughout the thing, Sam Rockwell and Bryce Dallas Howard might be very similar in age. I have no idea. So I don't mean to disparage Sam Rockwell, but he certainly seems significantly older than her. And is acting older than her, right? He's calling her kid and that kind of stuff, and it almost has like this like more of a like older brother sister or like, you know, uncle niece kind of element to it. And then like one of the reveals that like they were in love, right? And it's like, oh, okay, but like there's so many like double crosses and that kind of stuff that it's like not clear if that is true or not until it's like, oh, that was true. And it's like, oh, that doesn't work. And makes this really weird. And I don't love that dynamic as much. And that's a lot of what the last act of the movie is. And I think part of what makes it fall flat a little bit for me. There are are a few. I mean, there are a few too many like red herrings and double crosses, I think, in general. But like, there are a couple that are completely inexplicable and aren't really addressed again, right? Like, there's like one early one where like Sam Rockwell's character is a good guy. He's a good guy all the way through to the end, and that's, that's just the reality situation. That's how the movie ends. But there's like one sequence like kind of early on where like he is with Bryce Dallas Howard and he's like on the phone with someone, and it's like that classic thing of like she's only hearing what he's saying, but it's like the bad sound and stuff, right?
Yeah, it sounds more sinister than it really is.
Yeah, and she's like, "Oh my God, he's a bad guy," and she like leaves. But like the issue is like in the context of what he was saying, even his side of the conversation makes no sense. Like he's like being like, even when you get like the final reveal and it's like, oh, okay, I see what he was saying, it still doesn't make any sense. Like it's still such a weird thing for him to have said, even in context when you find out like later on in the movie. But even in the moment, they like have that beat, she runs away, another crazy twist happens, and then they get back together and it's like never talked about. She's never like, what did you mean by this? Or he, like usually in those circumstances, says, oh, this is what I meant. They just don't talk about it and they keep going on. It's like, what was the point of that? And the point obviously was to like have her run away for 5 minutes to introduce two more characters for another crazy twist. But it's like, there are a couple moments like that where it's like, you just did this thing that doesn't really make any sense. So you could introduce this other crazy twist that is also kind of insane. And so like this movie sort of has this weird feel of like trying to one up itself. And it does it in a shaky way, but it is anchored by these, I mean, again, Bryce Dallas Howard, Sam Rockwell, Bryan Cranston, and Henry Cavill are like all so entertaining that it largely doesn't matter for like, and Samuel L. Jackson for like the first like 2/3 of the thing, it works so well. So it is such an engaging, like crazy spy espionage, caper. Until it just sort of can't support itself under the weight of all this and like how outlandish it gets in its action climax. Henry Cavill is really interesting because obviously he's everywhere in the marketing. Like he's literally the front of the poster. His name is first. Argylle. Yeah, his name is first in the opening credits, like fourth in the ending credits for what it's worth. But like he ultimately is not a big part of the movie, right? He's got like a big pop at the beginning and then kind of like will appear sporadically in cases that don't really make any sense and that they also don't address that really. But
I mean, so one of the images I've seen is like, oh, Sam Rockwell will be doing a fight and we're seeing it from Bryce Dallas Howard's perspective, and like the scene will switch from her like, to Henry Cavill doing it, and she basically like is disassociating the two. Or
a little bit.
Yeah.
And there's some explanation for it, but it is ultimately like silly, and the reason is because we want Henry Cavill here. Yeah. But Henry Cavill's great, but it's just that thing of like, what do we get into him? Samuel L. Jackson's really good, but again, even he's not in it for a long stretch of the movie and then kind of pops up. Bryan Cranston, however, is really fantastic as like the evil guy. Like Bryan Cranston obviously can do evil really well. This is not really a competition piece anymore, but like he's really incredible as the main bad of the movie. And I think he does a lot to really spike menace. There's one sequence in particular where he kind of gives this story about like his grandpa's shotgun that is incredibly sinister and like, whoa, shit. And like does a great usage of a like fake out red herring and then pays it off really well that like Bryan Cranston kind of steals a lot of this movie, except for the fact that Sam Rockwell and Bryce Dallas Howard are so engaging and charming throughout it. And I still ultimately liked Argylle. I didn't love it like I kind of wanted to. I think it has a lot of failings. I think it is almost an example of a movie that is too clever for its own good in a lot of ways. But it is super stylized, right? It's Matthew Vaughn. It's super stylized. It's super entertaining and fun for a lot of the stretches until it sort of gets bogged down at the end. I definitely would say it's worth a watch. because I did ultimately enjoy my time with it. And it'll probably be coming to streaming soon because it obviously was a big bomb at the box office. It was like $200 million and made like 80 million. But yeah, I enjoyed it. I'd be curious to see, more people's thoughts on it and the beats that did and didn't work for them. Because is it that movie where it's like stuff is either going to work for you or not work for you? And there's not really a lot of like middle ground and nuance here. Mm-hmm. But on the whole, it's really interesting and it's really good. And there are a couple of moments there are a lot of moments that are really silly, some that work, some that don't. But, on the whole, I enjoyed it. And, I'm always down for a good spy film.
Like, obviously the most direct parallel I would have for it would be the Kingsman films. Yeah. And those I would very much look at in terms of like I enjoyed them, and I'm glad that I saw them in the theaters and stuff like that. I haven't really thought about them a ton since. I do every now and then. I think like, Ansel Elgort was like no, not him.
Taron Egerton.
Taron Egerton, thank you. Like he was really good, and it was very much a like, oh, what a fun Bond he would be. That's very much basically like him as Bond. This one very much seems like what a fun Bond Henry Cavill could be. It seems like it's maybe trying to, have that little bit of fan casting kind of flavor to it, as the resident Bond diehard. Does it deliver on that, or is it like, that's more marketing than what's really in the movie?
Yeah, I mean, I think the issue is that Henry Cavill's not in a lot of this movie. I mean, he's in this movie less than Austin Butler's in Dune Part 2, right? To give it some context. I mean, he's really not in the movie, except for like the beginning sequence, and then he just kind of makes like those like disassociation like appearances. So in that way, it kind of sort of, I mean, the opening sequence is a Bond pre-title sequence, and it's pretty entertaining, although the CGI is kind of spotty. Like weirdly, just in that opening sequence, I think it's the worst, which is sort of a shame because it's one of the standout sequences, but it doesn't really look that great at times. But Henry Cavill's charming, right? I mean, Henry Cavill obviously famously was the runner-up to Daniel Craig in 2006 to be the next James Bond, but was told, I mean, he was too young basically because he's like 25 or whatever. With the irony being that now he's probably too old to be James Bond because he's in his mid 40s, so they can't get 15 years out of him. But I mean, I like him. I think Kingsman is a much better Bond-inspired thing than this is. I think the marketing is marketing a movie that is not necessarily... I mean, again, the fact that I didn't know that this was about an author writing about Argylle, the character, until like a month ago when like the final trailer came out, I was like, oh, that's what this is. Because for so much of this marketing, they've been like, Argylle, the Henry Cavill spy film. And it's like not actually what the movie is at all.
Yeah.
But like, I think in terms of like the Kingsman comparison, I think Kingsman 1 is a better movie than this is. I think this is a better movie than Kingsman 2 is. And I think part of that comes down to your thing of like, I think a lot of the worst aspects of Kingsman 2 are found in this movie. And it doesn't have as many of the good aspects of Kingsman 1, but it has enough to make it on the whole more enjoyable than Kingsman 2 is. I think Kingsman, the original Kingsman, is ultimately like a pretty straightforward, like spy drama comedy film, right? And blend into those two things that fits really well and is like, this is a James Bond inspired film done in a Matthew Vaughn way, versus Kingsman 2 and this to a degree feel like these are Matthew Vaughn absurdist, outlandish movies that have spy elements in them, right? If that makes sense.
Yeah. At the end of the day, though, is this do they kind of all fall in that same bucket that you talk about with a lot of Bond movies of like, it'd be a fun movie to throw on the TV on a Saturday?
So Kingsman 1, I actually really love Kingsman, the first one. I think that is a legitimately great movie, both with Taron Egerton and also with Colin Firth.
Yeah. And Sam Jackson.
And Michael Caine. So that one, you can put it out any day of the week. this is, I think, actually is a pretty good Sunday afternoon movie, Trevor, to that point. Certainly much more than Kingsman 2, which I think is a lot messier. I think this is a pretty great Sunday afternoon movie. And in that sense, I think it's a lot of fun. I mean, I think the ending, it doesn't work for me, but I could see it working for people who are more into it just being like a crazy, absurdist, like the rules of physics don't matter anymore kind of thing. And if you're down for that, you're going to have probably a fun time, right? Mm-hmm. It's very silly. It didn't work for me as much because I think they try to be too like, this is kind of real. And then that didn't work. But it's a great Sunday afternoon movie, right? You put this on, kick back for 2 hours, you're going to have fun, right? Like and there are moments that I really enjoy. There's a sequence near the end where like Bryce Dallas Howard kind of goes spy a little bit with Sam Rockwell, and that's really fun and that's really engaging, I think. And when Bryce Dallas Howard kind of switches to more of a like serious, like, you know, trying to pretend to be a badass sequence, that really works actually for me. Because so much of it is her being like, what's happening? And so I like that. It's just they kind of crank it too far off the scale at the very end, but it is to me like the definition of a Sunday afternoon movie, right? I mean, it is like this kind of thing, you know, like Roadhouse, those kind of movies are just like throw on, kick back Sunday afternoon and just watch. And yeah, it absolutely is that.
Cool. All right. Well, let's dive over then to last movie of the day, Drive-Away Dolls. Tell me tell me just what this one's about in kind of broad strokes.
Yeah. So Drive-Away Dolls is a Coen brother movie, not a Coen brothers movie.
Oh, this is just that one. Okay.
Just one of the Coen brothers doing it as a standalone thing with him and his wife writing the movie together. It's an interesting movie, right? So it didn't. I walked into it really excited. Actually, I mean, I'm a big Coen Brothers fan in general, and I was really excited by the premise and the trailers. I think the issue is it's a little all over the place, right? So I like the idea of what the movie is, right? The two women go on this kind of like cross country, or I guess not cross country, but like coastal road trip from like, you know, the northeast, like New England area down to Florida. I like that idea a lot. And like kind of the road trip antics they get involved in along the route. They have these two bumbling henchmen a la Fargo chasing after them. They have like a Pulp Fiction, like briefcase, what's in it, like MacGuffin. All of that's great. And all those elements really work a lot. And I really like the two leads a lot. It's just, I think once we sort of find out the MacGuffin, the movie doesn't stick, right? Like the movie is building up to a gag because the movie is essentially one big gag at the end. But the problem is that the gag doesn't really work for me. And I think, you know, this movie feels like it is a late 90s teen coming of age sex movie in a lot of ways, which is super cool for like the perspective, like it's two lesbian characters instead of like Stifler, right? From like American Pie. And it's a very welcome perspective and just change the pace. But the problem is that once it goes off the rails in terms of like being just about sex and like sex jokes and gags at the end, I don't think almost any of them land for me. And it's a real shame because I think it's really snappy, clever dialogue. The movie does like interstitial sequences that again pay off at the end for part of like the end and beat with Matt Damon's character, but the gag doesn't land. Miley Cyrus has an appearance unlike those sequences, but it doesn't work. And like that's a lot of the thing. Like when the movie is just trying to be a cross country like road trip with like this thing that you've stolen, and being chased after by goons, all of that works really well. And I'm having a great time and laughing and like really enjoying the sequences when it's being like this like really sweet like friendship to maybe not story with the two leads. I really love that, and I really love their chemistry together. When it's being this like kind of dumb gag at the end, I really don't like it, especially because it blitzes through the payoff to all of the other beats of like the road trip stuff, the guys chasing after them, the love story really quickly to get this last like 10-15 minute sequence with Matt Damon's character that is really not it for me. And so, you know, on the whole, I liked it. On the whole, I'd recommend it if for another reason than it's only like 85 minutes long. So it's not long at all. And it's a really fun time, I think, until it doesn't work for me at the end. But yeah, it feels rushed, which is weird to say for a movie that's only 85 minutes long. It should not need to be running through the motions here, but it feels very rushed at the end, and a lot of the beats. I think when it works, it really works, and I think when it doesn't, it really doesn't work for me. Shravia watched it with me. She was surprised by the amount of sex in it. There's a lot of sex in this. Again, it is a late 90s sex coming of age movie. But the cameos you get along the way are really great. I love the bumbling henchmen, and their whole dynamic is really good for me. They're very much the two henchmen from Fargo. And yeah, I enjoyed the movie ultimately, but I think it has some pretty significant flaws that kept it from quite being the movie that I really wanted it to be and have kind of a great time with throughout for.
Cool. Yeah, Coen brothers, as in general, are like, I know of their movies more than I've ever actually watched a lot of their movies. Like, I was just looking through their filmography. One amusing one for me that immediately jumped out was like, I've never realized they directed Raising Arizona, and that was like one of their first things.
That's the one I thought you were gonna. Yeah.
Given that, like, I always tell the story of like,
Yep.
Nicolas Cage held me in his arms when my parents had me like audition for the part of Arizona for that one. So the fact that I'm like learning all these years later after telling that story X number of times, so like, oh, that was a Coen Brothers movie. So they're the ones that kept me from superstardom. But like looking through some of their other stuff, like Fargo, the one or two times I've seen it, like didn't click for me. Like there are some moments in there that I like Oh Brother Where Art, that was probably the one of theirs that I really enjoy.
Yeah.
Like even The Big Lebowski, and maybe it's just because I saw it too many times on like Comedy Central airings or whatever, but I've never really liked that one. Or I feel like I don't get The Big Lebowski. I don't get what it's about when I'm like, well, maybe it's really just not about anything. Especially I think I watched that first and I watched Fargo and I was like, oh, maybe these just aren't about
That's what I was going to say, is that the Coen brothers are very much filmmakers who I feel like you either really love or they're just not for you, right? I mean, in the same way where if someone's like, I don't like James Bond, I'm like, I get that. If someone's like, I don't like Coen brother movies, I'm like, I get it, right?
Yeah. They're Wes Anderson.
Yeah, right. Well, I love Wes Anderson too, right? So these are all three things I love. But out of those three, I probably like the Coen brothers the least, because the Coen brothers sometimes get critiqued for being a bit preachy in their movies, which is not an issue in this movie at all, I can assure you. But, you know, I understand that complaint, and I understand why people maybe these are not the movies for you. I like Coen Brothers a lot. This is not a normal Coen Brothers movie. This is probably the silliest one they've done since Oh Brother Where Art Thou, right? Maybe Raising Arizona even in some ways. So it very much is like, I mean, obviously it's only one brother doing it too, which is part of the reason, but
where do
it's an interesting
I guess
thing.
on that spectrum, I haven't seen either of these, but I feel like the conversation around them was that they were more lighthearted and funny, was like Burn After Reading and Hail Caesar.
Yeah, Burn After Reading, I think you would enjoy Burn After Reading. That's probably a safe one to do. Hail Caesar.
The only thing that comes to mind when I think of Burn After Reading is the Brad Pitt like dancing.
Yeah, Brad Pitt's great in the movie. Brad Pitt's really good at it. I mean, Brad Pitt steals that movie in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Hail Caesar, I think I would watch Burn After Reading first. And if you like Burn After Reading and have fun with that, I would give Hail Caesar a try. I think Hail Caesar's a little bit...
The big thing I remember for Hail Caesar was everybody
messy.
was like, this Alden Ehrenreich guy is really, really good. And then he immediately got like trounced by because of Solo. But like he's was the runaway success in I've heard great things about his turn in Oppenheimer too.
So that's what I would say.
Cool. I'll have to maybe start checking some of those out. All right. Well, I think that is going to do it for this week's episode. Thank you, Logan, for joining me and chatting movies with me. And then also,
My
the
pleasure.
hour before we started recording, just catching up and stuff. You can follow all of us over at That Nerdy Site. You can follow Logan at Lefty Logie, Loggy. Anything you want to give a shout out to there, Logan?
I'll give a shout out to That D Plus Show, which Trevor and Cameron have been holding down of late. Go check out all the episodes on that. And, we're getting close to the point where we're going to start thinking about what we're going to do for our summer theme. I'm excited and maybe apprehensive after last summer of what we'll do. So stay tuned for whatever we end up picking for this summer's That D Plus Show kind of classwork. It can only be up from here from Pirates of the Caribbean.
I haven't given a ton of thought in terms of, because we did also did in the fall last year, we did the Spider-Man stuff.
Forgot about that.
I don't know what maybe we could go back to the Pixar well. Ooh, we could do a month of Toy Stories.
That's true. Those are be good.
Yeah. I think this last week's That D Plus Show, we did a quick one on the Simpsons episode, Lisa the Simpson, which celebrated
it's a great episode too,
25th anniversary. So that was a nice little revisit. And then this upcoming week, I don't know if we're gonna do it. We might, timing wise, I don't know how it's gonna work out, but I think the Eras Tour is coming to Disney Plus, and Cam and I were interested in seeing it in theaters, but never did. In part because I was like, Taylor Swift's done a lot of Disney Plus stuff. They'll probably fork out the money to put this on Disney Plus. But that's also, it's coming out, I think, on Friday, which is normally when the episode would air. It's also, I'm going to Disneyland next week. So whether or not we sit down and try and do an episode around that, we'll figure out. But yes, keep an eye out for That D Plus Show. You can follow me at Trevor J. Starkey. In addition to that, I will shout out the ongoing Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth Let's Plays that I've been doing and have going for another probably month or two, I guess. I have the first half of the series scheduled and already uploaded, and that wraps up next weekend or a week from now. But I also have all the other episodes recorded. I just need to actually sit down and edit and upload them. So stay tuned for all of that. Especially there's going to be an episode late in the run where I went back and had to basically re-record the episode because I went back to edit it and all of the audio from the game had been borked. My audio was fine, but the game audio was incredibly choppy. My guess is I was uploading something at that time and it just was messing with the bit rate or something. So I was like, well, fortunately I have the save point that I started that episode on. So even though I've played a few chapters ahead, I'm just going to go and redo the key things I do in that. Cause it was very much at a point where I was like, I'm just going through story stuff at this point on the series. I'm not doing a whole bunch of the side stuff outside it. So it was it's an interesting episode in terms of hi, I'm talking from the future where I've already played the next couple of chapters, but when I went to edit them, I had to come back and fix this one. So
that's funny.
Yeah. Stay tuned for the rest of that series as it continues to roll out. You follow all of us over at That Nerdy Site or go to thatnerdysite.com for all the latest from us. As I said, if you like what you heard, please remember to rate, review, subscribe, share the podcast with your friends, all that fun stuff. Let us know what you thought of Dune Part 2.
Please.
Thank you for listening.
Argylle.
And Argylle and Drive-Away Dolls, if you saw that one. Thank you, as always, for listening. Stay nerdy and be good to each other.